Senator Morgan McGarvey, a Democrat from Louisville and Senate Minority Floor Leader. Representative Steve Rudy, a Paducah Republican and House Majority Floor Leader, and Representative Angie Hatton, a Whitesburg Democrat and House Minority Whip.
Without a doubt, better legislation should have been and could have been passed if we had had the full debate that the legislative process is supposed to allow. We're supposed to have 3-day notice for committee hearings so that the public can comment. And even in a time of COVID-19 restrictions, when people can't come in person, they can come at least by Zoom into a committee room. They have time to make phone calls. And when we get very little notice before a bill is heard in committee, the same day it's passed through the floor, there was even an exercise where one bill was passed through House committee, floor of the House, Senate committee, and floor of the Senate in one day to prove that it could be done. And I didn't think that was an accomplishment. I thought that that was sad. We had a limited number of days. The minority party was trying to use a filibuster. I mean, basically, we're filibustering everything. They were handed out their scripts to go make the same speeches that they were. And nobody's decision was changed because of any debate that was going on the floor. They were trying to run out the clock. They knew that was the process, and our members had had enough of it and said, let's limit debate, which is in the rules and the ability to do, and we took advantage of that rule that has been in the rules ever since I've been in the General Assembly, the ability to limit debate, especially on things that nobody was going to change their mind on. They just were trying to run out the clock where we wouldn't get to the next bill that they wanted to run out the clock on, where we wouldn't get to the next bill that they all block voted no against.
I think when we talk about the American Rescue Plan dollars, it's a great thing. And I think we've got to acknowledge Congressman Yarmouth's role in that. This really came out of his committee in the House of Representatives and made it to the president's desk, which is a great thing for Kentucky and for the country. When kids are gathering in a McDonald's parking lot so they can attend school, that's a failing of government. And we need to do what we can to get that last mile to make sure that families have the internet access that they need. So there's still some money left to use from the American Rescue Plan. In the spending in the budget and from the American Rescue Plan, we still haven't made those direct investments in the people and the businesses that have been suffering as part of this pandemic, not just the idea of the unemployment.
If the governor hadn't shut down a number of businesses, we wouldn't be having this discussion right now. I mean, let's be honest here. This governor has had a deleterious effect on business across this Commonwealth with his heavy-handed COVID policies.
Well, Renee, I think that was the expected outcome, but in all the ways that are measurable, Kentucky actually did very well during the pandemic. When we compare it to other states, we saved a lot more lives, and also our economy did not tank. We are about 4 times higher than we expected, like 5.6% up in our revenues, and way, 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 way better than we could possibly have expected. So while you can attack the governor for individual mandates that hurt individual businesses, overall, they were as quick as they could be. They were as limited as he possibly could make them. And he was making split-second decisions that he could come back later and counter-correct if he needed to. And, you know, this Monday morning quarterbacking is pretty much what we spent our whole General Assembly doing.
It's a debacle. And he'll have to answer for it in the election of 2023. That will be the defining issue, is his handling of COVID and the terrible decisions he made, like sending state police to cite people for going to church on Easter Sunday, closing down the schools when the CDC said that there was evidence, strong evidence, that kids should be in school, and picking winners and losers amongst businesses and decimating the restaurant business in Kentucky.
Well, several things to address in Leader Thayer's remarks that he just made. One, the governor actually, with the exception of a few weeks in December, did not shut down the schools. He left that largely to the local school boards.
He made it very difficult for them to stay open.
They could have stayed open under local control if they had wanted to. The governor made a recommendation, and that was it. We've seen how certain people, even in the General Assembly, treat the recommendations of the governor. They were not orders, they were not laws, and the school boards had the control over that. As for unemployment, I mean, yes, we're all frustrated by unemployment. I'm sure everybody on this panel receives calls, if not weekly, daily, from constituents struggling with unemployment. But let's talk a little bit about how we got there. the previous administration made
You're going to blame
drastic
Bevin.
cut.
I would have bet you money that he would have blamed Bevin by 8:30, and I would have won that bet.
But the blame where it's due.
You blamed Bashir in your opening comments. I would have put money on that
less than
too.
4% unemployment, and we couldn't have predicted a pandemic that was going to decimate our economy. So of course you're going to streamline unemployment offices when you have the highest rate of people working in 50 years. There is no way. And look, there are criticisms of Matt Bevin that you can make that I will agree with. I'll make some of them myself. He blew the election when he should have been a landslide winner. But his handling, you guys keep wanting to go back. There's nothing worse than an incumbent governor or president who tries to continually blame his predecessor for his problems. Look, he ran for the job and said he could do a better job. Stop blaming the predecessor.
You know, in this particular instance, I think it's important to note what Leader Thayer just said. Yes, severe cuts were made to the Office of Unemployment, and also that this kind of turned on a dime. The world stopped. It happened. People were unemployed in an instant, and there was this influx that was impossible to deal with because, as Leader Thayer stated, those cuts had been made. Now, I'm not saying that we anticipated it. Of course we didn't anticipate it. But that's what happens when you make those cuts to government. You can't all of a sudden get it up and running the next day because you need it now.
And I think it's important, though, to note that those cuts were made so we could fully fund the pensions, a problem that we've known about for years and decades, long before COVID. There is plenty of blame to go around in this whole thing. But this governor has unilaterally made the decisions and cut the policymaking branch out completely until we came to town in January. We advocated when we left. Please call us into special session. We will give you the tools you need, but you have to. We are not in a dictatorship. You have to include the General Assembly, the policymaking branch, and we got no calls back. Now, you can blame Matt Bevin. We can blame whoever we want on this thing. The fact of the matter is, the unemployment debacle has been going on long enough that it should have been fixed now.
If the public approves it, there will be 12 extra days where the General Assembly could call itself back in to deal with emergent situations like this. Mm-hmm. And it's 12 days because that basically gives us the time to do 2 5-day special sessions with 1 extra override day. Now, we may, if that passes and that goes in the Constitution, we may never use it for 10 years. But what the pandemic did show is a flaw in our Constitution that basically shuts out the people's branch of government from governing during an emergency for 9 months out of the year. So that is something that came out of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. Of course, Speaker Osborne has been promoting such an approach for a couple of years now, and it took the pandemic in order for us to get a bipartisan vote to put that on the ballot in 2022. So that's something that would change and give us some more flexibility and basically force a chief executive, the governor, to work with us, because we can call ourselves in.
We'll see what happens with that come
Renee,
general
I'd
election.
say that there's very little chance there'll be a year that goes by that we don't use it. And if I were the people of Kentucky right now, I would be sad to see a legislature call itself into session to do whatever that supermajority wills without input from the public, sped through, even passing laws to limit open records access and to do such things behind closed doors with a veiled pay raise for legislators. I think that would be a terrible idea to pass this amendment.
I think this bill, this constitutional amendment, doesn't actually give us 12 extra days. It just removes the date certain to when we adjourn. Am I not?
I think it gives 12
extra days.
Yeah,
12 straight up. Well, I know it gives us the flexibility to not adjourn that and bank extra days if we need them to do away basically with the calendar. I think we'll have some more debate.
Do you think your members understood that?
Yeah,
you think your
I
caucus
think
got
so.
That?
It went through several forms, and the Senate made several changes to it as well. And we're going to, we also will have enabling legislation next year that will go along with it and what it will actually look like.
Right.
We were trying to make the constitutional part, there's statutory parts and constitutional parts.
Right.
We want to limit the amount of stuff that we put in the Constitution, but where we can statutorily make some.
But I do want to get to a point that Leader Thayer made, that it doesn't allow you to call yourself in, but it does.
it started out as we could call ourselves in for a special session. That was the original version. And then it went through several iterations with Speaker Osborne negotiating with President Pro Tem of the Senate, David Givens, to get us to the final point that we still end on a date certain, but we have up to 12 other days where we can call ourselves back in.
So it doesn't get rid of the deadline of April 15th, and
It does.
it does.
It
Okay,
does.
just
No,
want
I'm
to make
sorry.
sure.
Yes, the deadline is still there.
The deadline is still there.
March 30th,
and April
for
15th.
odd numbered years, and April 15th for even numbered years.
Right.
And I think it's a reflection of a modern economy and a modern need. And I'll tell you, I don't think we would ever come back into special session unless there was an overriding reason to do so, because I think if we did, our constituents would revolt pretty strongly against that. But I have to tell you that last June, July, and August, my constituents wanted us back in special session to deal with the governor's COVID restrictions. And I would posit the opposite of what Representative Hatton said. A legislative session actually brings more transparency and more public input to the process, because you have to have committee meetings. And let's just say we were in a session in July or August. We would have had legislation that probably would have ended parts of the emergency orders earlier than they did, right? We started out at 15 days to flatten the curve. Now we're on, 385 days to control multiple aspects of our daily lives. We would have taken that up, and the governor and Dr. Stack and other cabinet heads and experts would have come in, and they would have testified in a public committee hearing about why the emergency orders need to be in place. And then you would have had business owners and school superintendents and churches come in and testify why they may feel the opposite, why they could have operated safely and responsibly in this environment.
In 5 days?
You'd have that sort of public input, but not in a 5-day session.
Yeah.
And it's hard to believe that with no restrictions whatsoever on the reasons that we call ourselves back in, that it won't be misused for things like redistricting ahead of, as soon as the census comes out. And if there were some sort of requirement that it be only for emergencies, maybe I could have supported it.
There's some members who aren't going to love this. I mean, keep in mind, we are still a citizen legislature.
Still have full-time jobs.
I know that we were talking right before we came on here about who's going home, who's staying up here tonight, who has to get back for what, for work, not for this job, for work. And so, I think that's one of the things that concerns me just as a legislator. When do you get to plan your other job?
And also limit the types of people who can be in the legislature. Is that not a concern, that if you have independent wealth or you have fluidity in your profession or you're a business owner, that those are the people that would be attracted to the General Assembly, not those who were restricted, such as educators and others?
I mean, what employer is going to allow their employee to be off for 3 months one year and 4 months the next? It's already hard. Plus, we have committee meetings throughout the summer. It's not like we're not here anyway. This would just allow us to do our job, and I think that's completely irrelevant, because you're looking at an extra special session or so. Well, chances are most of the General Assembly's up here anyway for committee meetings. So when you weigh it in like that, I mean, this would just allow us, when we're up here for our committee meetings, to actually do what we're elected to do, pass policy.
Right.
Nobody wants to be in Frankfurt any longer. We are a part-time citizen legislature. And believe me, when we adjourn sine die, we all want to get back home to our lives and our families and our other jobs. But there were certainly extenuating circumstances last year where people first found out that we couldn't do anything, and they were to restrict the governor's COVID restrictions, and they were begging us to get back in session. And it was a real civics lesson for most people, because they learned that we were restricted by the Constitution. So we'll see if by November of 2022, if that sentiment still exists.
Yeah.
The great thing about a constitutional amendment is the people will get to decide on this.
Right.
I think that while some people may have been asking for us to come back into session, that there are certainly people who are sorry that we even came into the regular session this year, including our teachers, which we failed to prioritize and continued to punish. And, we did further damage to the retirement system for incoming teachers. We didn't even fund textbooks. And then we gave away $25 million in tax credits.
I'm going to have to push back on
And
that.
So this is talking about House Bill 563, the scholarship tax credit bill.
We invested more in public education this session than has since CARE. we already talked about the infrastructure funding and that all-day kindergarten. Also in the American Recovery Act, we haven't even hit on this. There's $1.1 billion that we could have appropriated that we did not withstand that, and it goes straight to the schools. We could have grabbed that too, but we didn't. We spent a lot of money on public education. I mean, all-day kindergarten alone. I mean,
But what about textbooks and support for these other educational services?
We put $140 million into full-day kindergarten, and then Representative Hatton is saying that we did a disservice to public education. So I would say that the Democrats need to get their talking points straight.
Full-day kindergarten isn't the full extent of education, though, correct?
41% of the entire general fund budget goes to K through 12 education. And if you include the $1 billion we put into public universities, it's over half of our state budget. Some people won't be happy until 100% of the state budget goes to public education. And I don't know how you can say we disrespected teachers when for about the 5th or 6th year in a row, we overfunded their pensions by $500 million. That's $500 million that we have been doing now. And that's one of the good legacies of the Bevin administration, because it was his leadership that led us to do that, and we continue to do it under this administration.
And I want to talk about this pension reform. I mean, Ed Massey did the job right, made no changes to current teachers. He went out and he worked with all the stakeholder groups. A majority, I mean, the Jefferson
County Teachers
the Teachers Association in Jefferson County endorsed the bill. You know, he worked with, KEA was neutral on it. They weren't even opposed to it. I mean, Leader Thayer thinks it didn't go far enough, I'm sure, but I mean, all the stakeholders were involved. He did a great job of bringing everybody there, and we passed some meaningful changes for future hires and gave a ray of hope to a grossly underfunded and
Now, those endorsements went away with some of the Senate changes, I will say. The JCTA did not support the Senate change version of that, and the KEA didn't remain neutral on the Senate change version of that.
All we did was ask for teachers to work 2 more years before
So it went
they're
from
eligible for their
55 to
retirement.
57,
55
right?
to 57.
And 59 is the average age of retirement for most Kentucky
Correct.
teachers.
But I just think if we had enough money for $75 million in film tax credits and $100 million for historical preservation, for historical preservation taxes, and $6 million to a Steelbach Hotel project, that we had money to prioritize teachers.
well, we just wanted to set the record straight that we are the appropriators. That is our job.
But you have several years to use this money, right?
Exactly.
So do
and
you
that's
have
the
to
thing.
be called into special session? Couldn't you do it next year? You go back in January 4th.
When we return.
And that's fine. If he wants to let that money sit, that's fine. We can wait. January 4th is not that far off.
Right.
We're also waiting for some guidance. I mean, as we've all said, we're waiting for some guidance from the federal government on
When is that anticipated? When is that coming?
I don't know. I talked to the governor's office last week, and I don't think they had a date certain yet either.
And the guidance on the CARES Act, I mean, it changed 3 times before it was all said and done.
So we're going to watch that. But, you know, we talk about this American Rescue Plan money. That's I started off the show talking about the funding of all-day kindergarten. I'm still glad we're funding all-day kindergarten, but we're doing that because of the American Rescue Plan dollars. In the state budget that was proposed, the SEEK formula was not increased again this year. Textbook funding was decreased. Yes, I'm glad we're funding teacher pensions, and as Leader Thayer said, we're putting more money in the last 5 or 6 years. That makes up for some of the underfunding, which got us into this mess in the first place. The reality is, until we're talking about bucks for brains, until we're talking about pre-K, until we're talking about continued SEEK increases, until we're talking about how we attract and retain our best and brightest educators, until we're having that kind of conversation about education, yeah, you're going to hear people like me and Representative Hatton talk about the fact we're shortchanging education, because I think education is the answer, and it's the generational fix for Kentucky. Schools
are getting a major one-time windfall also from the federal bailout, from the Biden bucks, including $2 billion from ARPA to the Department of Education.
And that's the American Rescue
Right, American Rescue Plan. And by the way, the fact that we were able to keep the SEEK formula flat at $4,000 per student during the uncertainty of this pandemic economy, I think is something to be cheering, not decrying from.
It's not holding it harmless. And I think one thing that we look at is the $25 million that has now been given the chance for private schools to use public money. And here's my philosophical objection to this, is that the private schools that get this money to attract kids into private schools using public money, they're under none of the restrictions. They're under none of the obligations that public schools have. I mean, the hallmark of a public school is that they accept anyone who walks through the door. These private schools can discriminate on admission for any reason they want. They don't have to keep kids there that they don't want. That $25 million could have gone to increase the SEEK formula.
And what's to say that local governments won't have to raise taxes, property taxes, in the long run? We've heard that argument. Leader Thayer.
School choice is long overdue in Kentucky. My only problem with House Bill 563 is it didn't go far enough. We're only allowing scholarship tax credits and these educational opportunity scholarships in counties that have more than 90,000 residents. But these red herring arguments that the Democrats continue to use to criticize school choice and opportunity scholarships, they're unproven in other states. You take Florida, for example. Since they were implemented by Governor Jeb Bush, one of the national leaders on school choice, he sent me an email and I know he's emailed several leaders congratulating us on our success. In Florida, they have these educational opportunity scholarships and they're flourishing. And guess what? So are public schools in Florida. A little competition will make public schools even better than they are today for
Senator
children.
Hatton.
It will never help the rural areas. It will never help the areas I represent. All it does is divert $25 million that could be spent on public education. It doesn't even apply to smaller counties, and I'm glad it doesn't apply because I didn't want it expanded any further, but this is not the sort of thing that's ever going to help the places that I represent.
Well, first of all, if Leader Thayer wants to do a separate show with me on an argument of which party is helping working people more in this Commonwealth, I'm glad to do that on a separate show. But also keep in mind, he referred to my philosophical argument as a red herring, and it's not. These are private schools that are getting public money and do not have the same requirements and obligations as the public schools to their students. That is not a red herring.
So you're saying they could cherry pick the kind of students
That's
that they want,
exactly
or
right.
they could raise tuition so high that
But they're
would
not
outprice
getting
people
public
anyway.
money. They're just getting a tax credit. They could do a tax deduction right now. The argument is tax policy because these things could already exist.
But there's a huge difference between a tax
There
credit and
is
tax deduction.
absolutely a
Right.
huge difference in tax credit and tax deduction.
Thank you all for watching.